want to kick off. All right. Welcome, everybody. This is the fall winter session over fertility recommendations and yield. I try to follow the seasonality of what we're doing as far as what you guys and gals are doing out in the real world. And this is the time of the season when yield is coming in. Albeit I know it's been wet up in the Midwest, but yield is coming in. You've got your soil sampling you started, and here very quickly you'll be beginning to create fertility recommendations if you haven't already. And what I want to show you and demonstrate to you is you of including yield within your fertility recommendations themselves. And I'm going to show this first off through a PowerPoint, simply because I can go through some things pretty quickly, then through live demos. So this is Cirrus, as you probably all know. And in Cirrus, over on the left side, you got your soil sampling. The middle screen is showing the points, whereas the lab results have been attached, and I've got the phosphorus values in this case. And then that map there in the middle on the right side are 60-foot cells that have been interpolated, or you have the estimated value of what the p-values are, the phos values. And then over on the far right is a variable rate map on those 60-foot cells, utilizing both yield, maintenance, and yield in this particular equation, and then showing how that can affect your bottom line dollar. And that's really what I want to get into. So I'm going to move on to this next screen. I've learned through the years to not assume anything. Everybody should know this if they've been through my training classes, but I know a lot of people probably haven't. But everything we do is tied to a grid cell, excuse me, that's tied back onto your field boundary. And this is an exaggerated model, if you will, but think of that as a 40-acre boundary. It's got a lot of undulation. But the fact of it is every 60-foot cell would have multiple years, could have multiple years of data. You'll notice in the black and the red and the blue text that I've got 2016, 17, and 18 yield production, soil test data, as well as the weather, the planting, the fertilizer rates, the crop scouting. It's endless on what you can store per each one of these grid cells. And you determine this through your company, through what's called your company profile. All that's set up prior to you ever doing the actual farm right analysis. But I just wanted to real quickly touch on this because as you bring in yield every year, and let's say you start out with 2016 doing your soil sampling, then you bring in your 17 and your 18, and you don't soil sample until 19 again, but or maybe 20 or whatever the year might be in your cyclical process of that. The point I'm trying to make is you're going to have yield every year. And you can set up to use the actual yield per each one of those cells to adjust for the takeoff and then all of that for your phosphorus or anything else. So with that being said, as everybody knows or should know, the only way to get into the farm right model today is through Summit. Eventually, by this time next season, you should be accessing farm right through Cirrus Web. And I'm going to show you that a little bit later, the Cirrus Web. But today you can only access farm right through the Summit model and basically through Summit Professional. We also have Summit, but think of that as a basic package, but the farm right is only available through Summit Professional. Click that Summit Professional button, or click in Summit Professional farm right button. You're going to have a window that looks like this, and probably many of you have seen this. And what I want to show you is how you can use flat rate RECs, which is kind of the lower end of the spectrum, all the way out to using variable rate recommendations. And I'm using this based on tri-state RECs, which is your Michigan State, Ohio State, Purdue University's agronomy that they've came up with up in that part of the country. And it uses a yield goal that you can plug into it, but you can also, actually, I'm going to go one screen here to show you up there at the top. This is showing you the P on the very top is a buildup and maintenance that you can include together and draw down. Now what they've done is they took that, what looks to be pretty difficult math or complex math, agronomy here. The point of it is it's pretty straightforward because you have your current levels of your soil test, you have your critical levels, you have your existing soil test levels, the STL, the YP is just your crop yield potential, and the CR is the nutrient that's removed by the crop. So if I go back to this page, my point to you is simply this. I'm going to run and show you the difference between flat rate RECs, just enough said about that, compared to the tri-state RECs, which is the non-modified. The tri-state RECs from these three universities will use a yield goal, but it uses constants for the yield removal. And as far as the critical levels for the phosphorus here in the K. And I believe it's 15 parts per million for phosphorus and 150 for the K. And then I'm going to compare that to the modified tri-state, which is also from the same area, same agronomy, but it's using not only the yield goal and current fertility levels, but you have input values that you can enter using the actual yield removal off of that. Now, I think it goes without saying that if you're going to use actual yield on a field, you want to make sure that your yield is quite clean, valid, accurate, and validated, calibrated, I should say, as it's being fed into you, or at least ways cleaned up as to the best you can possibly do that. I'll about that a little later. I showed you this window, but here's the flat rate rec, and let me, that won't close that, shut that window down. All right, so here's the flat rate rec option, and I'm going to use DAP here, but I'm just going to set in a 150-pound flat rate for DAP on this field. This field is a 48-acre field. It's up in the state of Illinois. And the point I'm making is how does that compare to using the variable rate? That's the tri-state agronomic equation using the current fertility into that grid cell that we saw, that analysis layer, using actual yield. This one is just using the build P factor, which is 15 parts per million, and a yield goal. That's it. So you've got build, you've got your current fertility, and that's it in here. There's no actual yield being used on this one. That's the tri-state. Then the modified one, or P, gives you the capability to come in here and not, let me go back a page here, everybody. Here, of course, I've got it set up for corn using dry grain to a yield goal of 280. But in the background, you have that other agronomy math that's going on that's got that constant of 15 because it's using maintenance and build up here. So if I move back forward one here, this is including now the critical level. So it doesn't have just a constant, it's asking you what you want to build it to. And then it's asking you if you want to use the actual yield for the removal factor and replacement. So the point I'm making is if I go back to the normal one or the regular one, this doesn't utilize that. It's got constants in the background. Nothing wrong with that. It's not going to be as aggressive as what this one here is, but this one you can push up your critical levels and you can use the actual yield to adjust for that to fit any of your agronomic needs. Now, then we go through the potash, same thing on that. That's the flat rate. The tri-state K-Rec using the current fertility, their build factor, which I believe is 150 parts per million, and then the yield goal. And then here's the modified one, which is customized. And there again, you have two new options here, and that's the critical level and whether you want to use actual yield or not. Now, at the end of the day, after I've ran all of those, here's what it came out. Now, focus in on the P205 down here. This is the variable rate tri-state PREC, sorry. That was based off of what we currently were looking at, and there's what the total amount of product is. Okay, now that's got your 270, that's building the 275, 15 parts per million for critical, and that's what you come up with. This is building to 280 with the yield goal. This is using 22 and using actual yield. This is that modified one, and it only bumps it up just a few hundreds of pounds, or a little over 1,000, a little over a few hundreds of pounds is all. And this is the flat rate rec, and showing you what it does here. And my point to you is that you can make this as validated and as accurate as what you want with the variables that you can include in here. And I'll say this a couple of times, but if you want to make any changes to any of your recommendations that you're currently running, and bear with me, I'm going to jump back to this first page showing these. if you have your equations in here and you've got the logic built in as it is today, but you want to change any of that, now's the time to do that. And you can contact your account manager. You can contact Joe Thalen is on the line with us here today. You've got Ryan Hoffman, Ryan Rasmussen, Scott Cogdill. It's all going to filter back to our Farm Right team here in Oklahoma and Stillwater, and they're going to make those changes for you if and when you need to do that at whatever point in time of the game. Let me jump back up here. So back here to the K level, you can customize these to do whatever you want on that agronomic logic. And this, of course, is what I left off showing you there a while ago. You'll notice I didn't show the values on it, but I ran this one for flat rate lime, and it comes out using the tri-state to 268,000, or the flat rate was 268,000 pounds, and the variable rate lime based off tri-state only comes out to about 53,000 pounds. And the K-Rec up here at the top, it's a little more what you're doing here, but I've studied this out a little bit, and based upon what the K values were in the same cells, grid cells, as what the yield was, I still believe it's doing a better job than just the non-modified one. And then the flat rate for potassium, of course, goes up quite a bit here. The flat rate for the K2O. You have editing capabilities in Cirrus Web, which we'll look at in just a moment. So this is the Cirrus Web editor. As far as the recommendations go, the same editor, what we call our rec editor, that's in the Cirrus Mobile on the iOS system. So you have the option to be able to change these inputs to whatever benefits you and your customer base, but then after that you still have these different recommendation editor windows either in Cirrus Web, Cirrus Mobile, which is on the iPad or iPhone, as well as in Summit to be able to make any adjustments after that. So with that being said, I'm going to close this window down, and I'm going to share my Summit. And as I showed you before, everything is tied to your AgX account here. Again, I'm not going to make any assumptions. I know we have a lot of people online that's been using this for some time, but everything is tied to that sync ID up there in the top left. So when I go hit Farm Right, you're logged into your AgX account, and your AgX account, when I go place new orders, is going to pull up here, and you're going to see a window very much like that was like in that PowerPoint. But of course, you have to set your crop season for what you want to build this for. And then you have to pick the geography or pick the field boundaries, growers, farms, and fields you want to run. And you can run as many as you want. There's no limit here. But if I pick one grower, one farm, and let's just, excuse me, if I pick all these different fields, I can pick them all and then just say I just want to run it on these, 1 through 8. Over here on the right side, you'll always see your location that's set up for the accounting for where you're actually placing your order from. You won't see Farm Right 2.0. But what you will see is what equation logic and other tasks that you have assigned to you. Now, I've assigned all these tasks, what you see right now. A lot of them are agronomic logic, but many of them are things like yield removal for 1 year only, the yield surfaces. You want to do yield surfaces. If you all don't have yield surfaces assigned to your accounts, just contact us and let us know either through your account managers or just support at support at ProAgrica, and we'll get back with you with our Farm Right team and we'll get those addressed. So if you have limited amount of these different tasks associated or assigned to your account, the sky's the limit here. Whatever you want, if it's a land-grant school, public access domain data, we can assign that to you, no questions asked. If you're working with your lab and you want those lab results like Midwest or you name the lab around the country, we can assign that with permissions of the labs themselves. And then of course your own proprietary. So there's proprietary, there's public access, and then your labs that you're actually working with. Now what I was showing you earlier was I was using the tri-state Rex down here, and I was running this for lime and for P&K. That's the one that's used in maintenance and build. but it's got constants. It's not using actual yield within the actual equation itself, but the modified one is up here. So if I choose to run P and K up here, this is going to be the modified one. And there again, if I want to include the yield surface in all of this, I need to create a yield surface off those yield points that I've imported in through my summit or through the online summit. I'll show you that in just a second, because you have to have the yield layers in there in order to be able to do this. So I'm going to cancel here just one moment because I want to back up to the maps view and go to one of my fields and show you what all I'm talking about. So I've already brought in the yield data here for 2018, and it looks like this right here is just the points. Now when you run the analysis surface on that, and by the way everybody, you can edit this yield data, of course, and I talked about this before. If you're going to use the actual yield for adjusting for the crop removal for the nutrients, you need to come in here and make sure that the yield data is as validated as it can possibly be. So I'm just right mouse clicking on the yield layer and managing the yield data, and this window pops up. And in this case, I've got 5 different files that was collected on this particular field. And you can see all the different ones as I turn them on here. But altogether, all that total ends up to 9,260.57 bushels. If you had scale tickets, let's just say, you could come in here and adjust this off the scale tickets. Now, I'm not going to go into the weeds here other than to say this to you. There are ways to come in here and validate the yield data off the points, and you want to do that before you actually do the task through FarmRight, because if you just bring the yield data in and you don't validate all of that, you could end up with errors, of course. Now, if you trust your growers and you know you're getting good calibrated data and you've built that up over some period of years and whatnot, then just run with that. That's what you trust. That's the build factor you have in set up with that relationship with that grower. But my point is, if it's new yield data, it needs to be validated and leastways double checked on a few of the fields before you start running a lot of this through FarmRight, I'm saying. So you can validate the yield data in this manner as points. And then once that yield data is actually ran as a surface, it's going to go into something that looks like this right here. And this is what's going to be actually used in the yield removal, are those cells that you see out there. Those are 60-foot cells across the field, and every one of those cells have a value in it. We were in the old toolbox years. We used to call it a mega surface. We've gotten away from that, but that concept is still there. And it's that thinking logic that you can store anything you want per each of these cells over time, seasons, years, and over as much as this space as you want. So the sky's the limit here. Just making sure you have good valid data is critical. Once you start entering that data in here, it comes in as raw data, as point data. Yield points, the soil test points. But what happens and what I've already done is I've came in here and created my surface for each of these. So here's my pea bray. And again, that's all in the same cell. So if I turn that on and I look at my cells, and by the way, you can right mouse click on the layer here and view this as a polygon or a surface. And you can do this in Cirrus Mobile as well as in Summit. So there it is as a smooth polygon, what most farmers like to see. Systems actually using, and where the benefit and the value of the surface is at, is in this, because every 60-foot cell has a value. So if I look at the information on all of these, if I were to, let's say, put the buffer pH, and I'll turn that yield back on. So if I have all 5 of those, and I come in here and I say, I want to look at the value on everything I've got in that cell right there. Well, in that cell right there, all I did was come up here and click the drop down and say info on all layers. Here's everything what's in that cell right there. It's a 161.1, there's the P Bray value and so forth. So all of these items are included in here to be able to adjust for and utilize for more value within your yield recommendation, within your fertility recommendations using the actual yield. So I'll come back to FarmRight. I'll place that order. My task window will pull up, of course. and I'll choose the season I want to run this for. I'll choose whatever growers, farms, and fields I want to run this up on. You can run as many as you want, of course. And then come in here and you would pick what recs you want to run. In this case, if I wanted to run the flat rate recs like I was talking about earlier, I could say I want to run flat rate recs for P&K and maybe even lime. And then you want to pull all this up at the same time, and I would suggest highly place your rec orders based upon the actual crop you're going to be running this for. So it will just work faster. And here, let me explain to you. As you're going through here, if I choose to do this, if I know I've got a bunch of cornfields I'm getting ready to run this for, I'm going to run all my corn recs first. But then at that second window, and I'll show this to you in just a second, when it pops up and it says, do you want to print this off? I'll say no. Do you want to place another order? Yes, I do. It brings me right back to this window, and I would place all my soybean recommendations. And at the end of that sequence of windows, if I had a third crop that I want to run recs for, I would say, yes, I want to run a third crop. And the reason I would suggest that if you're only running 3 or 4 fields, it's not that big of a deal to change the crop. But I'll show you what I'm talking about as I go through here. If you got 100 fields you're doing this on, or even 25, it takes more time. And my point is use our system in the most efficiency that it was built for. So I'll use the modified tri-state for P&K. Let's use the maintenance and build along with actual yield. And then I'm going to use the tri-state down here for P&K. And I'll go next. Window pops up. It's going to ask if you want to do this by the entirety of the field, all the field acres, or do you want to do it by management zone? And in my case, I want to do every one of these fields by the entirety of the field acres, so I go next. And this was what I was referring to earlier. These are all my fields that I want to run for corn. So for my PREC, this is that flat rate rec option that I had set up. And I can say I want to satisfy that with 1846.0, and I want to do this at 150 pounds of that actual. And then I can come down here. When I fill this first field out, I can fill all the rest of those field boundaries with the same information with this field with first in the bottom left. Then I can come in here and change any of these. So if I've got some fields that I want to crank that up a little bit or bring that down a little bit, then I could make those independent changes after I've filled with the very first one. So if you've got 100 fields you're doing this on, or even 25, fill your first one out and then go make your independent changes. When I go next, it's going to go right into the tri-state PREC with the different variables. Now here's the K flat rate. And I'll fill with first. The one thing you have to be careful with here is our logic is going to overwrite the 200 and the 125 with the first column. So you can, if you only have 6 fields like I do, it's no big deal to come back in here and change this back to 200 and change this one over here back to 125. But you decide what's best for you. Now that's my flat rates, and I think I also had lime, so it's probably going to pull lime up here. So I'll choose to come in here and use one of my lime products at 90%, and I'll just hit fill with first with everything because I'm going to apply the same rate everywhere. I know you'd put more than that on, but just bear with me. So here comes the tri-state now, variable recommendations. And here's that first one, whereas actually this is the tri-state modified. So this is DAP for everything, we know that. And this is where we have it built into the equation. And I want to make a corn recommendation, dry grain, and I want to push this up to 280 bushels as the yield goal. This also has a 2-year build option in it if you fill that out. It's an option because it's in the black. Red's required. It's also an option to build to a critical level. And as I said before, their level, I believe, is 15 parts per million. But if we wanted to build this thing up to 22, we would enter 22 there. And if we wanted to use the actual yield within that grid surface, that analysis surface, we would say yes. Come right down here and hit fill with first. And then if I had other fields that I didn't necessarily, maybe I wanted to push that up to 300, and this field right next to it, I want to bump that down to 190. and maybe I only want to make the critical there at, let's just say 18 or whatever. I could make those changes independent from that first column. Next. And here comes my, probably going to be the modified tri-state K recommendation now. And it is. So it's asking me now what's everything that's commonality, it stays fulfilled. Okay, and you'll notice your yield goals, they kept the same. But the only thing different here is the critical level. So if I come in and say, well, I believe 150 is their constant one they have in their equation. But if I push this up to 180, again, I got to be careful. If I hit fill with first, it's going to overwrite the 300 and the 280 with, or the 190 and 300. It's easier maybe to do that. So if I come back in here and I hit fill with first, it's going to put 180 everywhere for the critical level. And then I could change and go back to my 300, what I want to build to there, and just 190 on this field. And then hit my next button once I get all those input variables filled out. And now it's going to pop up and bring up the tri-state rec that's not using actual yield, and you see it's not even in here. So I'm going to leave this just exactly because nothing's changed here. I've already got my 300, my 190 as my yield goals, but it's got a constant it's using for the FOSS to build for critical for 15 parts per million in the background, and I'm not using actual yield. And then if I go to the K rec, it's the same thing. It's got a constant for the K that it's using in the background for build and maintenance and build, but I get to set the yield goals. So when I hit next to this, it pops up and it asks if I want to print this off. I'll just say no. I get a confirmation page. So if I place that order, then it's going to pop up and ask if I want to print it. And I'll just say no to this. But here's where I was saying now I would say yes to place another order and go in and do whatever fields I had for soybeans, those input parameters, and then go right back through and do maybe if I had wheat or milo, maize, grain sorghum, whatever you have to do as your third crop, and so on. And as I teach people, if you've got a lot of input variables that you're having to change a lot on the fly as you process this, you're not using our system in the efficiency for what it can be utilized for. This topic is about doing this, of course, utilizing yield through your equations as well as the Cirrus family. But I had to get to all of that in Summit using the FarmRight model. Okay, now just an FYI thing. If I go to the dashboard right here in Summit, I can display the live tracking. This is going to show me what it's doing and what it's down to. So it's down to 7 tasks. Now if I hit refresh, it's down to 6. So it's not quite done yet, but when it is, sync that back to get those recs back. So let's jump into Cirrus Web. And I'll come up here and open up my browser. Maybe. I'll pull this over. Open up my browser, go to my cirrus.ag. And this is the site today, everybody. And just a real brief history, brief. This was released just December 10th of 2018, so it's not been out even a year yet. And we've not made a hot release to everybody, but it's out there if people want to come to it. So it's cirrus.ag. You would log in with your credentials, with your AgX credentials, and then go into the settings, and you'd be posed with this window. By default, you could set this to be whatever you want to use it as. I did a training yesterday, and I had mine set to metric. But you would set all this up, and you'll notice I'm a premium account, and I'll talk about that in just a second. So if I come in here now, go to my home button, and go to the dashboard, this is going to show me my growers, farms, and fields for everything I've got. And on this left side of the screen are all those activities or layers. I could filter this out by clicking the filter button and say, well, I want to look at yield data, the yield by itself. Now today, we're only showing yield as point data in Cirrus Web. I don't know how long it's going to be, but somewhere in the near future, we're going to have the analysis layer in there, and that's that grid cell I've been talking about. But if I save this and filter it by yield, now all I get is the yield data, what I would have for all growers, farms, and fields. If I narrowed this down and said, well, I want to look at a particular grower, farm, and field, so if I come down here to that particular grower, farm, field that I'm after, I got to remember here it's Jim Abbott, and it's field number 3 that I want. So I would select my farm and select that one field that I'm only interested in really narrowing this down to and looking at the yield data. Now if I click anywhere outside, it shows me all the years of data I have, and if I click on the 2018 yield, it opens the yield data up at the field level. And again, as I stated before, those are point data that you're seeing there as it goes around. It's actually the polygon data, but it's actually the point is the center of the polygons. That's what you see in Summit. Here they're giving the actual polygon data from that actually derives those points. So the center of each one of those points would be your point matrix map, what you would see in Summit. Okay. So this is, of course, giving you what you had set this up, showing you how you had processed it and what the values were and everything, and all the specifics on the layer. And if I come up here, I could put this in a 3D view. And I've worked enough with 3D. 3D is a cool thing. In a conversation with a grower, as we all know, because you're going to look at that and the farmer's going to say, well, okay, that I can identify, I know where yields are, but why? Well, as much as anything, it's a conversation starter to help people realize that, hey, you actually have variability out here, and we can help you figure out what maybe the variability is coming from. Is it a fertility issue? Is it an organic matter issue? It's something doing with drainage, whatever that might be. But it's a conversation starter. And if I come back here and say, well, I want to go back and look at all the activities for this field, that's all those layers, of course, and I want to filter out, I'm going to click the filter button, and I want to look at everything that I've got as actual fertility recommendations on this field right now. So if I save that, that shows me now all the fertility recommendations that I have on this particular field. And here I believe, let me find the right one. I think this is it. This is the recommendation that built to 275 using a corn rec map using the constants of 15 parts per million. And this was that tri-state rec. So this is showing you your color pattern and showing you the variability across that, what we call, or what I call, a true variable rate map by cell by cell. But you can edit this. This is what I was referring to earlier. I said I would show you this. This is the product editor. You have all of your amounts here where it's currently at. Now when I set this up originally, the original was calling for less than 3/4 of a pound on the minimum. But the controller could only spread 50, so I entered 50 as the minimum. That means that everywhere that was a 0 gets a 0 rate. So you got areas out there, if I shut this down, you got everything out there is going, actually I included 0 in the actual legend here, but there's some areas in here that are zeros. And the point I'm making to you is you can set this up to say, I want zeros to be 0, but I want anything from a 0.01 up to 49.99 to be popped up to 50 because that's the minimum that the controller can put out. And I did that earlier already. And then the maximum I set in this case to, maybe I didn't set a maximum, but you'll notice that the original is 291 and maybe I did set it to 290. Looks to me like I did. But this gives you from the original rate to the adjusted rate what the percent change is. You can adjust off percent change. You could enter in the whole values here and come in here and credit this, or you could come up and do this by the actual product cost. So if I came in here and said, well, this is $425 a ton, and don't laugh at me here, I don't know the fertilizer prices today, and we're going to charge $8 an acre to go out there and do the spreading on this field, I've now got a total cost, and it's up to about $1,600. And there's my cost per acre in this case. Down on the bottom, You have a black, which is the original line, showing what the variable rates are, all the way to the orange, which is the edited one. Now, the edited one shows that little hiccup right here because we set the minimum to 50 pounds. That's the reason why that's coming out. I hadn't changed it really anywhere else, but you could come in here and say, well, you know, a grower might look at this and go, well, I don't want to put that much product, or maybe I don't want to spend that much money. So maybe I'm going to knock this down to $1,200 for the season. And you hit enter, and it's going to adjust that and show you the changes in difference between what you're doing currently and what the original actually called for here. So you're undercutting, but maybe it's an economics thing. And if you come back up here, you'll notice that dropped that down to a pound, a little over a pound. Come in here and I say, I've got to have that at 50 pounds because that's what the controller can only accept. Then I can lock that at 50, and that's going to increase that and take that back up. So the minimum that he could put on using that particular machine is $1,206. So we do honor the agronomy closely as we possibly can. And I teach people, and we've done a lot of analysis on this. If you see the percent changes, don't pay attention to the minimum so much because that's a logistical deal. But if you see the maximum, average, and total product getting above 40, I'm going to go back and rerun my rec and maybe put a lower critical value in or a lower yield goal in or something like that. Adjust this on the agronomic side. Don't adjust it on the logistics side if it starts getting above that 40%. And that comes from many years of analysis, what myself and about 5 others down here in Stillwater, Oklahoma, have ran all kinds of analysis on this to see how that's affecting the agronomy. All right, if you can always return back to the original. You can come up here and credit this with a previous product. You can credit with a flat rate product if you had those as well. Now there's 2 previous here. And if I opened up and said, okay, well, what do I have? Well, I've got some potash recs that I had done earlier. And if I were, I don't know, this is actually a flat rate, so this is probably going to zero everything out. You're probably not going to do this with potash and phosphorus, but nitrogen I've seen some guys do that with. But if I were to choose this one, it does zero it out because that's putting on 250 pounds. So I could always come back here, say no, and I'll say I want to return to the original, and I could start this process back over. So you can always work your way in and work your way back out to what you want to work with here to get this thing adjusted what's proper. So I'm going to shut down the editor here on the Cirrus Web, and I'm going to pull up my Cirrus on my iOS screen here. You should be seeing Cirrus on the iOS. And if I come up here and hit the menu bar, and then come down here and pick a grower that I'm working with. So if I pick my Jim Abbott, and I go down, I clicked the wrong one. If I go down to my Abbott Farm and go down to that number 3 field. Now there again, I did a training yesterday. Some guys from South America, and it was in Portuguese. I'm going to come back here to my general settings button and change this back to English units. Now when I hit done, I go back, it should be back to English. So I'll go into my field 3, and I'll come down here and look at the activities layer, and I've got a recommendation in here for the this is that potash rec, one that you saw earlier, only I've got it classified a little bit different. But you can edit the legend itself down here in the bottom right. And you could, this is set to equal interval. I've noticed a lot of people in ag will use best fit and still using 5 classes. You could set that from a surface to a smooth polygon, whichever of those that you want. I'll set mine to a smooth polygon just to show you what it would look like. But it's still driven off those cells in the background because we drive everything off that grid surface that you see. But you can come up here on options. Again, I'm at the field level, and I've pulled this layer up in the activities view. I can edit this recommendation right here in Cirrus Mobile. So when it pulls up, you get the same view what you saw over in the Cirrus Web application showing up here on Cirrus Mobile. And I won't run through all this again because it's the same identical application, just a different program. And the values, of course, you can change and do whatever you might need to. And you've got the chart down at the bottom as far as the line chart to look at the graph and see how the original compares to any of the things that you make as an edit. So you have the fertilizer recommendation editor in Summit, you've got it in Cirrus Web, and you have it in the Cirrus mobile system as well. That is pretty much everything that I wanted to talk about. Oh, one last thing. I talked about Online Summit for getting yield data in, and I want to show you that real quick in case anybody is not utilizing that. Let me come back down here. And go into my ssdsummit.com, and you would log into this with your AgX credentials, of course. I've already logged in. But here's something that's really nice about Online Summit. Now we call this OLS, but it's the Summit Import Service. Today all we can import in are the yield files. Give us a few more weeks and months here and you'll get the as applied data in here as well, but that's coming. But what's powerful about this system is that I could use this with my own account to send up to my own AgX account. But the simplicity, and I'm not going to use simplicity. The logic is this, is I could have a grower set up, and that grower, Brett Sutton, could log in under his account, his AgX account, but he could then come in here and upload the files to Bill Richardson if I was his service provider. So that way the yield data would be imported in and be pushed up to my AgX account. Saves you from having to drive out, get the yield card, do all the processing and everything after the fact, because it does all the processing in here for you. So you can do your own AgX account to send yield data up to it, or anybody else's for that matter. All you need is the actual email address of that other AgX account you want to push it to. And you can add others in here. So again, the logic is to be able to set up farmers to push yield data up to you. And I know what I'm saying to you guys. That may or may not be the simplest thing to do, but if you've got some pretty progressive guys, it can save you time and effort to get the yield data in. Now, I talked about when you do this, you'll import this in, and here's all the growers, farms, and fields I have on my local summit. If you were to come in here and say, well, if you're just bringing this off one grower's yield card, you've only got the one grower. You had somebody coming through, a custom harvester, and he did several growers, you may only want to pick certain growers out here and disregard everybody else. So if you get 35 growers on a card from the ideal is coming into you, you may want to say, well, the only ones I'm actually looking for are Jim Abbott. So if I come in here and just pick Jim Abbott out, you can add as many as you want. If you come in here and say, well, I also want the Kearney growers off of there. So that will disregard everybody else and only look for those two growers off that tag. Now, 99% of the time, I would imagine you're only going to have the one farmer's data. But that's in case that's the ideal of that, is to save you time to say, well, query this thing down where there's only these two. And then you can give it an upload name. You would browse out to that yield file. That yield file has to be zipped up. Okay? Now, this is a John Deere GS3 file. But no matter what it is, if it's an older John Deere, if it's an older Ag Leader, whatever it might be, if it's in a case or whatever, you have to zip it up. And you have to zip it up in a folder. So it has to be, number one, the same format. Number two, it has to be less than 1.1 gigabytes, which is a heck of a lot of yield data, of course, and because it's going to zip all this up. But you put that in that zip folder and you navigate out to it. And if I were to do that and open that up, it automatically goes to loading this information. And it's going to unzip it and do all the work in the background. You're probably going to ask me, well, how does it know what to do? Well, you set up your OLS on how you want our system to actually do the processing. So you go over here to the settings button on the left. And again, I'm just talking the yield data here. So if you're going to use yield data, you want to check mark probably all three of these. And you're going to be using Imperial. And most of this is self-explanatory, so I'm not going to read it all. But the important part down here is on the coverage, the yield coverage. Well, I shouldn't say the important part. These are important too. So yield observations that intersect a single field are going to be clipped and assigned to that field. Or you could say, I want all yield data. I don't want to just clip and look at all the yield data. There's reasons for both of those. I normally do the top one here because I want to clip that to the extent of the boundary anyway. And then observations that intersect multiple fields, you can clip and assign those observations to the field, or you can have it to ask you manually. And the whole ideal of this is to automate this processing. So I very seldom do this anymore, but I do this for the growers that I work with, that I've worked with through the years to get them to the point to where they're pretty darn good at collecting the yield data. It's good calibrated valid data, as I referred to earlier in this session. Then, if I've got them sending me in multiple yield files, that's all zipped up, of course, you can import the data, and you can set this now from 20 to 130, I think. But this has changed, actually. Go down to 0, I guess. So I'm going to set mine to 20 on the low end. And all I mean by that is, if you get to the end of the time that guy has sent you, that guy or gal sent you all those yield cards, and 20% is all you get or less of coverage, you can show to him or her, here's all it actually processed. Can't really use this as an actual yield layer for takeoff, for maintenance and build, because you don't have a very good coverage of the field. But you could have that. Another option, another concept is, you could sit there and tell it, don't actually process the yield data until we get at least 70% of that field set of acres covered by the yield data that's been brought in through this model. So you might have 3 or 4 different imports coming in, and by the time the fourth one shows up, now you're above 70, and it goes 70% coverage of that entire field based upon the yield monitor polygon data that I was showing you earlier today. Then it would go to processing it. Now, that's not to say if 2 weeks after that you get another yield file sent to you from that grower and it takes it up to 98% coverage of the field, then it's just going to reprocess that and it will tell you, and you'll get an updated file with more accurate yield now showing up there. And then this can go up to, I think, 130%. And why would you want to process anything above 100%? Well, you get a lot of people in the early stages of working with yield monitors that keep their header down, don't pay attention to how many times they crisscross over the same location they've already harvested. And of course, the second time it goes over it, and a third time, and a fourth, and any time after that, it's a zero flow. So zero flow is zero yield. So you may want to show a farmer, hey, listen, Bill Richardson, here's some areas that you might want to do something to do a better job of collecting the yield data last year, because you got a lot of areas where you kept the header down, you got a bunch of zero values. You do enough of that, it's going to affect the average over a period of time. But you can set it up to act like what you want to. I would not even mess with the crop or the crop assignment until you had to. Matter of fact, I teach people don't even mess with this until you end up, I come back here to import issues, and it's got a crop assignment showing up as an issue in the crop assignment, then that's probably, that's not probably, it is because the actual grower or person doing the yield monitor data collection didn't assign a crop or any of the rest of information specific to that crop. I wouldn't deal with that until you needed to. And then when you do, it saves it from for that grower, for generically for everybody, or I should say it's universally for everybody that might ever use a yield monitor, and it will assign that crop each time. So I'm not going to go through all of the rest of these, but the fact of it is you can import yield data through the OLS and get data that way, or you can do it through Summit. Now, I'm sure that many of you have seen Summit and how you do this, but I want to pull this up because I want to point out something to everybody. If you're going to use the OLS model, use the OLS model. If you're going to use Summit Desktop, use Summit Desktop only. So only use one or the other. Don't use them both. And you're going to, what I want to explain to you in that manner is simply this. The algorithms are not perfectly the same because they're in 2 different sets of code. So you're not going to be far off, but they're not going to be perfect. So the other way of doing the yield monitor data input is to go through Summit, through data management, import data. Type of data, of course, would be your harvest, and you would pick out whatever the controller file, yield monitor file would be. So if I had yield monitor that was GS3 and above, or yield monitor that was GS3, I could retrieve the data via the wireless or WDT transfer for Deere, or I could browse out my desktop and grab the data there, whichever might be the easiest and most appropriate way. If you didn't have a lot of yield data, this works pretty fast, but you're tying up your resources here whenever you're doing it this way. So that's just simply up to you on how you want to do that. My suggestion would be go through the OLS route once you trust that the yield data being sent to you from the grower is pretty doggone accurate. But again, this is the desktop way. And if I go down here to my particular grower and grab that file, you have to grab that RCD folder. Now, it's not zipped here because we don't need a zipped file on the desktop, but you do have to have that zipped up to go through the online summit, through the web version of processing. So as far as utilizing the yield, and I'm going to come back to my PowerPoint here, the sky's the limit here, everybody, on what you can incorporate on your account, on your AgX account, and what you can associate. You could do the yield surfaces. Wrong button, sorry. Forgot I was on PowerPoint. You can open it up and do yield surfaces for dry, for elevation, whatever you might have in it. You could have agronomy where you want to incorporate for yield removal for 1 year only. You could have university-defined agronomic equations that you could utilize there. And we don't have to get permission from anybody. If you want those, we can assign them to you. If you want to use anything that is a lab, such as Midwest or any of the labs around the country, we have to get permission from that lab in order to be able to assign that to you. Or you can come up with your own proprietary recommendation equation logic. And if we haven't built for you, if we already have it built for you, you can edit. You can tell us what edits that you want to incorporate into that, and we'll do that, much as what you saw here with the Michigan State, with the tri-state recs from these 3 universities. So there really is not a limit, but 2 things. You have to have the data, so you're limited by the data. And number 2, you're limited by what you know to do with the data and what you know to ask of the data. So if you have the data and you have the agronomic logic and you've got the data, the sky's the limit here. So this basically covers everything what I wanted to touch with everybody today regarding utilizing yield data and fertility recommendations in the Cirrus family. And again, Summit only has FarmRight in it today, but eventually it's going to be embedded within Cirrus Web here in the near future, however far out that is. So I just wanted to kind of clarify some things, give you some ideas possibly that you hadn't looked at before or thought about before for incorporating actual yield and incorporating other variables to show at the bottom line is, everybody, as you've heard me in my training sessions say, we're trying to show the value to the grower. That's where you're being paid, and you guys are paying us because that grower sees value in it for them through your services. So if you have any questions, if you have any comments, or you have anything that you would, if you want a copy, and let me come up here and stop the recording.